Hello and welcome to Property Matters, and today we're going to be focusing in on politics in property. And joining me today is John Howard, regular contributor at Property TV, property developer, Conservative chairman, I should say, shouldn't I?
Ex-chairman and now president. They make you president when you get old.
Right, okay. Author, mentor, investor, developer. Yeah. What else, John?
I'm feeling and sounding very tired with all those titles, but that's about it for the moment.
Don't know where you get the energy from, but you do very well, and we're glad to have you here. Okay, and joining John is Fraser Myers, deputy editor of Spiked Online, my favourite political commentators. Welcome, Fraser.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Good to have you on, and let's hope we have some good banter between us all. So, in the first programme, this is a series of two programmes. In the first one, I want to talk about the government's involvement in the property industry. In other words, how hands-on do we really think they should be? Because to me, I see a lot of mistakes. I see a lot of very poorly thought through ideas. So, John, you're the Conservative. I'm going to come to you first.
Well, we don't know what he is, do we yet? We're going to find out during the programme, probably, aren't we?
I reckon we will find out.
I'm pretty sure he's very fair and very neutral, I would imagine. Anyway, well, you can criticise the Conservative Party. Of course, you can criticise any party that is in government. However, if you look at what they've tried to achieve over the years, Help to Buy helped 700,000 people. Now,
I think it helped more developers than it did people.
It might have helped more developers, but it certainly helped a lot of first-time buyers as well. And of course, the developers probably are donors to the Conservative Party, but we won't go down that route, including me. But
well, you're a donor or a recipient?
Donor.
Right,
so,
okay.
But the Help to Buy certainly helped me over the years and helped a lot of developers. I accept that, but it's also helped a lot of first-time buyers as well. Stamp duty relief to first-time buyers, permissive development. You know, all these things have come in to try and speed up and support the housing crisis, if you want to call it that, in the UK. You know, and I think you have to be fair. It's very, very difficult in this country to build on land because you've got the local MPs saying, "Oh, I'm going to lose a load of votes if we accept all this housing." But it's got to go somewhere. And actually, Labour, which I don't like mentioning them at all, but I will do. Labour talking about compulsory purchasing land at farmland value in order to build new towns and villages, similar to what they did with Milton Keynes in the 1960s and 70s. Now, to be fair, I don't think a Conservative government could come up with that idea, even if they thought it was a good one. But Labour are able to, and I think there've been a number of initiatives, some which have worked well, some haven't. One of the latest initiatives today, actually, from London School of Economics, is that, and this will go down now well with young people, is that the older members of society who own a large house should be able to sell that house and buy another house with no stamp duty, in order to get it moving and get them into a smaller home, releasing the larger home for a bigger family. Now that will go down like a lead balloon, because we are the generation, Stephen and I are the generation that have benefited most probably from property values over the last 20, 30 years.
John, I understand what you're saying, and the ideas like buying up land as farmland or at farmland prices to develop it's great. And the idea of new towns and out-of-town towns is great, except everything takes so long. I mean, I can remember working for Sir Terence Conran down at Butler's Wharf, Tower Bridge there. Took 20 years to get off the ground.
Yeah.
You know, before it was accepted, and it took the Lord Mayor's office being there as the catalyst to finally really get it going. I mean, it was shocking living down there at one stage. I mean, I used to try and come home to Butler's Wharf on the Thames there, and the taxi driver is not taking you over there, mate. I might not get back, so I'm not crossing that bridge. shortage. But these things take such a long time. I remember people telling me, the commercial road area in London, oh, that's going to be the biggest buzz ever. Well, 40 years on, I'm still waiting. I'm still not that keen to get out my car there after dark, It's very, very difficult. And these towns like Milton Keynes, it's only in the last 10 or 15 years that it's just been accepted as a normal postcode.
I mean, I don't know how you feel about that. I would agree with that, to be fair.
Well, you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think the big failure has been the failure to build houses. Now, whether that's expanding London, for instance, or other big cities, or whether it's the failure to build new towns. We need 600,000 new houses a year to meet
and
demand.
We're building 250 at best.
And so what worries me is there's not been enough sort of activity in terms of either letting builders get on with it, or we don't live in the days where you have a government housing works or public housing works anymore. Whether you want to revive that or not is an open question. But we're neither letting builders get on with it, nor is the government itself building enough housing. But there is a sort of flurry of activity around the rental market, some of which makes sense, some of which doesn't. There seems to be a lot of interest in the demand side of things. You mentioned Help to Buy.
Look at Homes England. They've got Homes England. And I borrowed £20 million off them and paid it back, fortunately for everyone. But I mean, Homes England are the government property bank, and it's been set up in order to drive housing, get housing built. So you can't say that the government haven't tried. You can't say that.
I'm not disputing they haven't tried, John. What I'm asking is how hands-on should they be with the market? Because let me just ask you a question. My theory for a number of years has been this, that if we have a housing shortage, if developers develop and are sure that they can sell their product at the end of that development process, which to me comes down to funding and ease of mortgage applications being accepted, is it not true that we'd have as many houses as we need?
Well, I do think, Michael Gove has made some pretty stupid, daft decisions in my view. Very bright man. You probably know him personally, but the one thing he's come up with the other week was actually 30-year fixed rate mortgages. Now that seems to be, for first time buyers, a very sensible. We don't want it at 7% like it is in America.
Yeah.
But that sounds quite sensible to me. And everyone knows then you've got some stability. 95% mortgages guaranteed by the government. That seems quite sensible.
But John, we've had this conversation before. Can we have lifetime mortgages which go past the life of the person applying? They can be passed down to relatives. In other words, I think the emphasis goes from the person to the property in terms of mortgage. Yeah. So that property's got a mortgage. If you want to take it over, well and good.
To me, that sounds quite a sensible idea. I'm not bright enough to work out the economics of it all, but
I think more choice in terms of sort of housing products. It's not like, because you need different ways of renting houses as well. Yeah. There are only there's not enough variety in rental contracts. And if you go to continental Europe, people can rent a house or a flat for 10 years or something like that. You can have a sort of stability without necessarily owning a home. But again, I think the big problem comes down to supply, and it's not just that. The thing is, the green belt I think is the big issue. There is a real reluctance to build on the green belt. There is in the public imagination. There's this idea that it's only rolling hills, that it's all beautiful meadows, and it must never be disturbed. When in reality, there's a lot of quite not very nice land that's really prime real estate that could if you go to places like Chesham and Amersham, where there was a big by-election recently, there's a tube station next to a big housing development, and there's all these fields, and it's in the middle of London, and you think this is absolutely there should be blocks of flats there for families and things like that. It's really disappointing to not see houses being built, and often that's really about the government getting out of the way rather than
absolutely. Well, the green belt came in 1948 or 1952, something like that, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first Labour government's Town and Country Planning Act. Yeah,
so it's their fault.
Yeah.
So
you got that one.
It's never been changed since then. It's crazy. It's 70 years old. It's bonkers. But the only thing the council can build on Greenbelt, do you know what it is?
No.
Park and ride. So they can cover it with tarmac. Yeah. But there's areas in this country that are Greenbelt that are next to local tips and all sorts. It needs to be adjusted. It's a good thing. We want it. but it needs to be brought up to standards. And that's another thing that this government have not done. And they could have done it. And they just don't seem to have wanted to take on, it's like commercial rates, simple thing there. Again, archaic, should be done on the VAT or whatever, or we'll do a modern system. There's so many things this government have shied away from. Perhaps it's because of COVID and Brexit and everything else they've had to do, or perhaps it's because some of the ministers just aren't very good.
I think it's also, the government has instinctively sided with sort of current homeowners when they're not really seeing the potential of, if they create a new generation of homeowners, then that's a new generation of voters. I think they're very short-sighted in that respect.
Spot on.
But they, many people who own a home, and understandably, I understand why if you own a house, you don't want loads of building works happening down your road. No. But there are bigger interests at stake. There is a national interest in having more houses, having more infrastructure and those things. And that needs to be challenged. I think government has just been weak.
The government have been weak, I agree with you. And I think Labour actually can afford, certainly for the first year or two, can afford to be quite ballsy with it all. But this Conservative government, I agree entirely with you, in many ways have been weak and too scared to take on challenges because it would upset some of their members.
Yeah.
But when you're canvassing at an election, you're knocking on the doors mainly of aspirational people who are living on the modern property developments which they've bought a house in, because they're the ones who are likely to vote Conservative. So the more, and the government know this, that the more people that buy their own home are likely to vote Conservative rather than Labour.
Yeah, but they haven't done enough to sort of flip those voters over. Labour, it'll be interesting to see what they do. I mean, in the past, they've made pledges to, build 300,000 houses. In the new Labour government didn't do that.
Well, I always want to know who's we when they say we're going to build. Who's we?
But also when Starmer talks about building 1.5 million houses in the lifetime of Parliament, he's talking about social houses. He's not talking about the houses that many people in this country want to live in. He's talking about houses, and I read today that we need another 1.6 million homes in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Pro rata on top of the 300,000 that they say they're building.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to take a break there. So join us after the break when I'll be asking John and Fraser to delve even more deeply into the politics of property. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Matters, and we're talking about politics in property. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Fraser Myers and John Howard. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
John, question for you really to start with.
Why are you bullying me? Go on.
John, I've been doing programmes with you.
You've been bullying me for the last 5 or 6 years, to be fair.
5 or 6 years.
Yeah, go on.
So we might as well carry on in the same
vein. Carry
on.
Yeah, go on. I can take it.
Okay. Look, 16 housing ministers in the Conservatives' tenure, which means an average of 8 months in office for each one. How on earth are we going to get consistent and practical housing policies in place?
Well, I totally agree. I've met a few of them. The amount they know about property, they've probably bought maybe 2 or 3 houses in a lifetime, would you say? Probably.
Maybe, yeah.
Probably. They're clueless. The argument is that they're coming from it from a different angle. For me, you need someone who's experienced in property to advise and to be a minister. And I cannot, for the life of me, understand. They've got Kevin Hollinglake, I think he's a minister. Now, he had a string of estate agents up north, knows about properties, he's also a property developer. What's he doing? Pensions or something, isn't he? I don't know. Anyway, it's crazy. Why not put a square peg in a square hole?
Well, I think you would be hard pressed if you went around and asked members of the public who is the current housing minister. I think it'd make a brilliant answer on
I don't know.
It's Lee Rowley, but it'd make a brilliant answer on Pointless, wouldn't it? You'd win the round. I mean, that just shows that surely housing is the most important thing
according
to
the
the overwhelming majority of just people.
Yeah,
it's the thing
as well.
We spend most of our money on, most of our paycheck goes on our housing. It's it's integral to how you see yourself, how you live your life. It's where you spend, it's where you sleep, for God's sake. Yes. It's how people measure, where they are in life, measure their wealth. So to think that this is just given it's almost an afterthought. It's not. It's never been considered a sort of top ministry. It's not a portfolio that politicians want to take on.
You say that, Fraser, but at every Conservative conference that I've been to, and I've been to a few of them, some are good, some are bad. Liz Truss's was interesting. You're probably there. But every time they say that housing is the top of their agenda, it's the most important thing they have to sort out. Yet they put people in that role who aren't capable of probably doing it, haven't got a good brief, aren't experienced, and like you said, they get rid of them within an average of 8-9 months. It's bonkers.
Yeah, it's seen as a junior role, effectively. You go on,
Isn't it one of those roles that you get when you're on either the way up or the way down?
It is basically, yeah. And
but it's so important.
We only had, I think, before Lee Rowley, we had the current culture secretary, and she was only in for a couple of weeks.
McVeigh,
she's done it. Lots of people have done it, but. Again, it's a stepping stone role.
According to Stephen.
Yeah, lots of top 16. Ministers have been there.
16.
It's just, again, it's not something that the government particularly takes seriously, and I think that goes for both parties as well. It's never been seen as a prized ministerial role in the same way that Home Secretary, Defence Secretary.
Do you think it's time that somebody ought to stand back from this and just have a look at the overall thing? Now, let me just say quite openly. I live in a fairly expensive property across the road here. Right? Yes. How was that? I didn't do it by being super clever or anything. I did it by selling my homes 2, 3, 4, 5 years at a time after having it. I made a reasonable profit, tax-free, reinvested in property, and gradually stepped up over quite a number of years.
Okay. You benefited from property inflation like I have and people of our generation.
But for instance, do we think the days of just being able to sell your own property for whatever you want and have the profit tax-free, do you think those days are numbered? Do you think somebody ought to have a look at that? But I bet you there's not a government in sight that would have the dare do it.
Labour don't believe in anyone owning more than one home, do they? As far as I know.
You'd have to ask Keir Starmer if he believes in anything, but that's
that's a clue to how he votes, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Mr. Starmer interviewed at the weekend. I mean, he certainly stuttered over a few of his explanations of their policies, didn't he?
No charisma whatsoever.
He's not exactly the most electric guy you'll ever meet.
But people may see him as a steady Eddie and a safe pair of hands.
Yeah, I mean that's what the Tories are trying to turn over. Essentially, they're trying to portray him as a bit of a risk, which I don't think works because he has the charisma of a breeze block and is essentially committed. He's essentially committed to changing nothing. He's so many sort of policies. He's copying the Tory ones. I suppose he's putting a bit of difference in housing actually, in emphasising the sort of house building target.
I think the other thing he's going to do, which Gove hasn't quite got the balls to do, is to say to landlords, by the way, if you rent the house to someone or flat to someone, you can never get them out if they pay the rent. So we'll end up with what was originally years ago regulated tenancy or assured tenancy as a market rent, but you can't get the tenants out.
That takes us back to the days of Rackman and everything else, doesn't it?
Yeah, we'll be going full circle on things.
Yeah, and you have Sadiq Khan in London who's mooted, capped rents and things like that. It's another sort of. The problem is, again, it's a disincentive for landlords. People,
absolutely. And the joke is, by the way, cap rents came in Southern Ireland in 2016. Last year, they've reverted it now because last year there was only 682 properties to rent in the whole of Ireland in August.
Oh yeah, there's viral videos of people queuing down the streets in central Dublin.
And Scotland have tried it for the last year, and I'm doing some developments in Scotland, and that hasn't worked either. Because when the properties come vacant, they cap it at 3% a year. But when they come vacant, the landlords are shoving it up 20%.
Yeah.
So what's the point of that?
Yeah. John, are we struggling with all of this, I've suggested one thing that maybe needs to be looked at. The other thing is stamp duty. You and I have discussed this before, whether it would be worthwhile moving the stamp duty to the seller rather than the buyer, simply because that way, if it was an inclusive figure in the price of the property, you'd be able to fund it.
Yeah, Stephen, over the years, I think that's the most sensible suggestion you've ever made. Right. Because you're absolutely right, because the seller hopefully has got equity in the property. Whereas if you're a first-time buyer, well, not first-time buyers aren't paying it, but if you're a second-time buyer and you're struggling for that bigger deposit or whatever, then I think
3% or so can really hurt.
Really hurt. And of course, that's what's come out today, as I said earlier, about older people not having to pay it, which will go down like a lead balloon, I'm sure.
Yeah. I have to
I think it's a great idea, by the way. So does Stephen.
I have to defer to your expertise on stamp duty, but
it
sounds sensible.
I mean, it really is a tax that probably stops people from moving to different parts of the country for jobs and everything else. It's a big problem. But then,
well, John,
they need the money.
That's another thing of why housing is so important and why the sort of fluidity of the market is so important. Think of the amount of people do need to be able to move.
Yeah.
That people do need to be able to. There are so many sort of lost gains, economic gains, from people not being able to move around the country, from not being able to live where they want to live near where the work is. It's just, there are so many kind of cascading disasters that come from the fact that we have a housing crisis. It's bigger than just a housing crisis.
It is,
it's an everything crisis.
John, as a developer, you've developed all over the country, haven't you? And you've done very well for yourself.
Well,
what's the biggest block you find in terms of developing?
Crikey, where do you want me to start? I think the biggest block has to be the amount of time it takes to obtain planning permission. And that has got worse and worse and worse over the years. The government have tried to do something about it by penalising authorities that don't give you a decision within 3 months. That hasn't really worked, because what they do, it gets to nearly 3 months and they go, well, unless you withdraw the application and put it back in again, we're going to refuse it. What do you do? So you let them have more time.
But is that on the basis of the planning officers recommending that it be rejected, or is it actually the lay committee saying no?
No, that's just the time. That's just because they haven't managed to deal with it within timescale. And that's. I mean, we are more worried in this country about newts, and bats than we are about people having homes to live in. And that is a major problem.
I had a permission refused once. It was on the Thames, replacing a boatyard with a lovely building with a lovely glass roof, which slid open to a sort of central dining area.
We're getting the impression.
Right, you got the idea?
Yeah.
Well, they turned it down because they said the glass would dazzle the fish.
Yeah.
I mean
you just can't make
it up.
Unfortunately, the environment has become it's taken on sort of almost religious quality.
I agree.
In this country.
Too much so.
People obviously want to preserve a good environment, especially where they live. You want to live near nice green spaces and things like that. Of course you do, but when even Prime Minister or former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was saying that he couldn't have an extension on his house because of the newts issue, there might not even have been a newt, but the possibility of newts meant there could be no building.
It's absolutely bonkers.
We've got to move on from this. It's the 21st century. We need to be able to build. We need to be able to build housing, infrastructure, all kinds of things, and we're just being held back.
Totally, I agree.
And is it the planning officers holding it back, or is it the lay committee?
No, I don't think it's the lay committee particularly. I think there are not enough planning officers. They don't pay them enough. So any good ones end up being planning consultants, and we use a number who used to be in the local authorities. I think, for me, the planning officers should be paid a lot more money. You get a better quality person doing the job, and they should be paid from central government, not from local authority or even county council. They should be paid from central government, and they should be paid a lot more money.
Okay, but I've tried to draw you twice on the subject of lay counsellors.
Yeah, I know you have.
And what I'm trying to get from you is that do you
Should
think
they be experts?
Well, do you think, for instance, that development is so complex these days, not only with green issues but all sorts
Yes,
of
I
environmental
agree.
issues, that these people are capable of making the right decisions?
Well, at one time, Ben Gummer, who was the Ipswich MP, a very good MP, became a minister, and Ben was very helpful to me over the years on a number of issues, planning issues. He came up with an idea where you'd have, and I was actually asked to be on one of them, in a local authority area, you would have a subcommittee of experts, an architect, engineer, that type of profession, property developer, dare I say, if that's a profession, who would then advise early on in the application on the look of it and everything else, and the ability to be actually be developed. Because sometimes people can get planning permission but can never develop it.
Yeah,
because it's too much money, it costs too much to do, and it's a waste of time. Especially in brownfield sites. So, and by the way, if we built on every brownfield site available in the UK, we never have to build on green land.
right.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. That idea never happened. Whether you really want a bunch of architects sitting to look at planning applications, I'm not sure. They're a bit woolly for me.
Well, they're a bit too fee orientated, aren't they?
Well, they're a bit too fee orientated. They're all very nice people, but they're a bit woolly.
I was saying to Fraser off camera earlier, there used to be a development company not a million miles from here that used to specialise in first-time homes.
I know them.
I'm sure you do. And they did very, very well for themselves. And they're a superb service for young people wanting their first home. But they were all very square. They all looked very much the same.
Very similar.
And if you did have a drink and get lost on the way home, you'd be hard pressed to know.
You could be anywhere in the country just about. Yeah.
You'd be hard pressed to know which one was yours. But in some ways, I think at one end of the market, we need to sort of get back to that in a way. A bit of simplicity, a bit of straightforward development.
I think the one area, Stephen, that they've got wrong is shared ownership. Because shared ownership is a great opportunity for young people to get on the property ladder, where they buy half the house and the other half is held by the local authority or a housing association. But they made it so difficult because they still have to pay rent for the other half. Yeah. Which is crackers. In which case, they might as well go and buy a house anyway.
Well, the throwback on giving the keys back is crazy numbers.
And selling them on is very difficult.
Yeah.
And that's a real shame because it's a good idea.
You've got to find somebody who wants half a home.
Yeah, but it's a good idea in principle.
In principle.
In principle, it's a good idea. But that's a simple thing that they could easily sort out and change. They've just got no experience.
Okay.
They're naive.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, on that note of
optimism.
Yes, I was struggling for the word.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Thought I'd help you out.
I'm going to say a big thank you to Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked Online. Thank you for coming in, Fraser.
Thank you.
John Howard, as ever, John, thank you for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Great to have your input on stuff. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters. And don't forget to tune in to the second in this series of programmes about property and politics. See you then.